Welcome once again to the Old Gold Soccer Podcast. It's Greg Blake, or what's left of him, and of course Kyle Patterson, KP. Hello, KP. How are you?
I'm good, Blakey. How are you?
I'm a little bit older, a little bit wiser since the last time we spoke. But I'm as good as gold. Looking forward to this particular podcast, number 4, is it? I think it is.
Number 4, episode 4. And I should say, Blakey, that we're also at some point vaguely going to celebrate 40 years anniversary from when we first tried to be funny on television back doing segments with SBS. So there's some we'll work out the exact date if we can remember. Yeah. But it's been a long time, but we're back in tandem.
I just want to quickly touch on something that's very close to my heart because we've spoken about it. But people that were born after I reckon about 1995, maybe even 1990. Don't recognise they don't even believe you when you talk about certain things. I mean, I spoke to one young bloke who doesn't understand that Olympic Park is not Olympic Village, that there was in fact a stadium, Olympic Park, down there where Collingwood's got their home ground now. Yeah. And it was, do you know, it was actually the first officially FIFA recognised soccer stadium in Australia.
I can believe that because a bit of trivia for you. I've been researching a history book separately. Mm-hmm. When the Victorian State League was inaugurated in 1958.
Mm-hmm. What a year that was.
Your
birth all happening.
In 1958, again ahead of their time, the match of the day would be played at Olympic Park to give it that grandeur, to give it that a feeling of being a true European sort of setting, big crowds. So, Olympic Park,
and
famous venue.
Channel 9 started covering Victorian State League on their match of the day at Olympic Park on a Saturday.
Circa, I reckon I could tell you it was roughly 1973 or 4. It was driven by the World Cup because we qualified for the World Cup, and suddenly, and I know you're a skeptic about saying that the World Cup doesn't really change things, but it changed the view of commercial TV. They went, hey, maybe this soccer thing's got something.
Yeah, but how long did it last? That's my point.
Long.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that long.
Tony Charlton was a great commentator, by the way. And the other one too, and this is where people are incredulous. You remember the old Rothmans medal?
I do.
I say to the Rothmans medal dinner was an entirely different species of its own. You would go there, for example, and there'd be around the table settings, there'd be 20 packs of 20 Rothmans cigarettes.
For you as a smoker, you probably quite enjoyed.
I waited till the end of the evening and got all the ones that nobody picked up on. But it was, and people were smoking at the tables, and I nearly got punched up there. I know a few people. It became a bit ugly at times because there were scores.
Very ugly. I mean, my old boss, my editor, Laurie Schwab, got almost, I think, assaulted. It's fair to say, not just brushed. He got assaulted because of some idiot. Who had kept a grudge all season, got on the drink and punched him. Gutless wonder. We won't name him. I think I know who it was, but we won't name him.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I won't name the bloke that came after me, the very first Rothmans medal I went to, because I was doing the column for the Sunday Observer at the time, which was one of the 2 Sunday newspapers in Melbourne. And I was pig ignorant, to be honest with you. I'd got a tip that... on the eve of their relegation game, like the Piran Slavia at the time. And I found out, I heard that there was a few people out on the Terps the night before. I wrote it in the column. Boy, Jingoes, didn't that come back to haunt me? It rankles with me a little bit because, again, that the sort of, the way the game is now, you don't... I would in a heartbeat go back to those
I can tell
days.
you what's changed is journalists barely get to spend any time with players. When I travelled with the Socceroos in the 90s and the late 80s, when the game was broke, the players, the journos, everyone would be in cattle class at the back of the plane in the cheapest seat that the Australian Soccer Federation could afford. And you got to know the players. Because a lot of them weren't full-time. They were having to take leave from their job and say, I might get sacked because I can't go back to work in time. But the good thing was journalists and players could actually... We could help the players get their story out because they'd know us, they'd trust us. Yeah. These days, it's like you got to go through 5 requests and 3 spin doctors and submit your questions, which is something no journo should ever do, to get a meaningless, monotone answer from a player.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because there was something else that you mentioned a couple of weeks ago. And you mentioned too the difference between old soccer and new football, or whatever you want to. But back then, you got paid for a win, you got paid for a draw,
Yeah.
and you didn't get paid for a loss. And nowadays, all got this. I don't even know how it works now.
Well,
but
that's a big bugbear of mine. I mean, I don't begrudge the current players in the professional era earning good money. However, what is happening when you've got a squad limit of roughly 26 and 4 or 5 of those are sort of underage or junior players, you sign a contract, you fall out of form, you kind of got no imperative because you're going to get paid the same money. Back in the day of the NSL,
Yep.
if your team was having a bad run, right, you were training and playing for next to nothing because the bonuses, if there was money for a loss, it was so poor,
Yep.
you'd barely have enough to put petrol in your car to drive to training. So I'm not sure what that's done to the game. I'm not sure it's good, taking away that incentive because...
No, I agree with you completely.
Yeah.
Because if your job is to win games of football and you're not succeeding in your job... there's got to be some sort of... No, it's not punitive, but there's got to be some sort of relativity to it. I don't know, but let's get on to... let's drop
just on that point, one last thing.
Please.
Thing. The other thing that's starting to really bug me in the game is all the invasion of stats into soccer. I keep reading about the XG, which is the expected goals from a certain amount of possession or passes or this. And I'm sort of going... I keep reading these columns on XG and these tables with so much meaningless data. The great beauty of our game is we have a scoreboard and it says either 1-0, 1-1 or whatever it says, and that's the story.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I know we were having a laugh off air about this, but there's so many of these ridiculous things that have squeaked their way into the game. The one that drives me absolutely batty is where young commentators will talk about... he's wearing the number 16, but he's playing the number 2, and then the number 3's in the number 5 spot. And all. It's not basketball, you dickheads.
Yeah.
Just tell us where they're playing and what they're doing.
Yeah.
I don't need your interpretation. Now, I was listening to a couple of commentators just recently, but very similar to Arsenal in the European Cup game against Borussia Mönchengladbach. I'm thinking, what is wrong with you?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Just watch the game and call it and bring the excitement.
Part of our problem is when the Dutch recolonised Australian soccer and had this rigid 4-3-3. So that's when the whole thing started. Oh yeah, you're a number 7. So the number 7 does this. You're a number 8. You're a number 10.
Yes.
And it just was totally wrong.
Boring as batshit.
How do you relate to? How does some fan, particularly if they're not spending hours on the internet to keep up with this stuff, how do they go and have a conversation in the pub afterwards? How do you think number 7 tracked the number 3? I mean, no, just tell what you think of the game.
Yeah, it's gone beyond. Anyway, listen, the Dutch. You love the Dutch.
The Dutch.
Across to New Zealand.
Yeah, look, we were going to talk about this this episode. We'll get to it now.
Yeah, that's what
local versus national. I think there's a debate that has to be had because the essence of football, from anywhere in the world you want to go to, are derbies. Inter versus AC Milan, Spurs versus Arsenal, River Plate versus Boca Juniors. We can go on forever.
Queen's Park Rangers against Fulham.
No, I'm not going to count that one. That's totally irrelevant. Derbies are the essence of football. When the Victorian State League was basically a Melbourne State League, there wasn't any clubs from outside Melbourne.
Yep.
There were big derbies every week. There was Hellas versus Alexander. There was probably George Cross versus Green Gully, were a big one, the big Maltese derby they used to call it.
Yep.
But then we got to the A-League, and it was decided in the wisdom of those people, and they did eventually admit they were wrong. The wisdom was one team, one town is the new mantra. They threw out the whole concept of derbies. Now, my view is, until Melbourne City arrived to challenge Victory, Victory weren't going to grow. But as soon as Victory had a team, particularly a team owned by the Abu Dhabi Petro sheiks, suddenly they had another reason to exist, which is we want to beat that team. We've got to finish above that team. Likewise in Sydney, and I was very close to this, when the Wanderers started, Sydney FC became a bigger club because suddenly they had someone else in their backyard.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
So my question to you, Blakey, is the National Soccer League wasting its time putting more New Zealand teams in that Australian fans do not care about? They have to travel 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 miles to go and play in Perth or play in Brisbane. Nobody cares. I think we need to have more derbies, not less, and get rid of this whole idea that Oceania is got any relevance to us anymore.
No, I agree completely. I thought it was deeply flawed to introduce the New Zealand Kings or the Auckland Kings way back in the late 90s. I could never work out the wisdom of it. I'm keen because you've been an insider to this. What are the benefits?
Well, they don't bring many benefits. The TV rights are paltry. We help them develop their national teams. That's about all. They don't do anything about bringing big stars because tell me, okay, maybe Marco Rojas is the only Kiwi.
Winton Rufer.
Well, Winton Rufer, he skipped the NSL. Winton Rufer went straight to Germany or Austria.
Wasn't Fred de Jong? He was.
Okay. You're trying to pull my argument apart.
No.
Okay, less than a dozen. I don't know why we need to prop up New Zealand football. Okay, they're in Oceania, different confederation. They got their own issues with the rugger buggers over there. All we do is subsidise them because when I was involved in the game, it used to irk me that the salary cap subsidy that the Australian clubs got also went to the Kiwi clubs. But the TV rights that came back, if they were pulling their weight with TV rights, you go fine. It's a fair swap. They get money from our TV pool. They put money back into our TV pool. It didn't happen like that. And I just don't believe that people in Perth really care when Auckland or Wellington come off a plane out of the sky. They don't know them. They're 3 time zones away from each other. I think we've got to stop it. We've got to stop this madness.
I'll go back to the mid-70s and I just... It's a point that I still think is relevant because even with the old National Soccer League, you had a situation that after a very brief period of time, all the novelty went out of playing the Marconis or the Brisbane Cities or the... and you're talking about the derbies, and this is where I agree with you completely. And back in the mid-70s, before we got ambitious with the national competition, which wasn't a bad idea, but I just don't think it was appropriate for our level of competition of this game in this country. Does that make sense? You had, of course, the local competitions, which were derbies every week, essentially. And then you had the Australian Cup competition. But there was something magical about seeing, for example... because I remember seeing Marconi come down to Melbourne. You didn't know them. You didn't see them. There wasn't television. So there was a mystery about seeing Ray Richards and seeing Jimmy Rooney live. But it's a one-off. You don't want to see it every goddamn week, you know? Yeah. We had it perfectly. I would straight away recommend, if I were in charge of the game, is withdrawing back into really robust state competitions with derbies all the time, and then, of course, introduce the Australia Cup, but in a different format than what it is now. And there's a mystery, there's a magic about seeing teams once. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I'll see the Auckland Kings once. Yeah. I'm all right with that, once. Yeah. But I don't want them here every...
No, you don't need them. And the thing as well is that the reality is for us, the costs. People, and look, Australian football, and you've referred to this in previous episodes, the Svengalis and the gurus who arrive and they don't know our game. One of the things that people who live in Belgium or Holland or England don't get is the size of our country. Because in Belgium, you could probably drive across the country on a bus in a day. So having 5 divisions and promotion and relegation is not a big deal because you know what? You go down a division, you just go on a different bus route. In Australia, the costs associated with taking a team of footballers from Melbourne to Brisbane, overnight stay in a hotel, all the bus, the food, the watering, we are spending so much of our limited resources, because let's be honest, we're not a wealthy game. We're spending so much of our limited resources on infrastructure. We're paying Qantas or Virgin or hotel groups or bus companies, so much of our precious treasure, which should be kept in the game. So I'm saying at the moment, there needs to be a serious look at going back to state-based competitions. And yes, the big clubs like Victory and Melbourne City, who are at this stratosphere at the moment, might have to sort of understand they're coming down a bit because they're going to be playing South Melbourne and Oakley. But you know what? I've got a feeling the game's going to produce more players, keep more of its own money. And you know what? We're going to have a vibrant competition because every suburb is going to say, hey, Victory are coming to our suburb next week. Yep. I think we've got to do it. And it means squandering the national profile, and it might hurt TV revenue, but at the moment that's dwindling anyway.
What TV revenue? Yeah. Tell me about the two. Yeah, and look, the other thing too is And this, I hear this so often, that there's a huge dislodge now between the A-League clubs. There's a kind of superiority complex, and the local clubs. And I think that's wrong. I remember even when the NSL was formed, that there was a really strong bond. You know, state league players would go and see NSL games. NSL players would go and see state league games. Everybody knew each other. If there was a good talent down in, you know, the industrial league or the provisional league or something like, they'd get on the blower. They'd just ring up and say, "I've got you were talking about Viduka and what's his name, Kalina before." They don't do that anymore because it's not structured that way.
Yeah. So there's that issue. And I think as well, we need to accept that summer, this is a different topic. I'm not going to go into the summer versus winter now. However, when we had a National League start in winter, then we moved that to summer. But summer's now been also populated. You've got Big Bash, you've got the Women's AFL, you've got all the basketball's now playing through that period. So I think we just have to go back, and you made the point earlier, the water will find its own level. Yeah. Go back, rebuild from our strongest base, which is those great traditional suburbs in the state league.
Our strongest base. That's exactly, that refines exactly what I'm trying to say. Find everything that's strong about your game.
Yeah.
And build on that, and stop trying to be ambitious, stop trying to get ahead of yourselves, because it fails every time, every single damn time.
Yep. And the other thing that has to be looked at, and the current CEO of the national body talked about it, which used to be a big part of the game, transfer fees. Mm-hmm. So the little club, if you were a little club in the Metropolitan League, and it happened in my club, I used to play for Box Hill, and we had players like my brother Scott Patterson and Mickey Valentine. And what would happen is you'd produce these players, and then Heidelberg or Juventus would come along and say, "Here's 5,000, here's 10,000. We want to take that player." Now, it wasn't as though the club absolutely needed that money to stay in business, but you know what? It bloody helped to get a transfer fee to say, yes, you did develop that player. Yep. Now I know the big bugbear among the state league and the NPL clubs or the VPL clubs in Victoria is, there's this vague compensation system. They lose players to the A League and to the Europe, and they get told, "Oh yeah, there's the FIFA compensation system," and nothing ever comes out of it.
Yeah, no. I just think there's so many fault lines in what we've got at the moment, and it's not. I hope that I'm not coming across as some old bloke that's complaining, because I think there's very sound. We're putting together some fairly coherent arguments that people should really consider.
Yep.
I had a point too, by the way. Oakley. Yeah, you mentioned Oakley.
Oakley, yeah.
And I was just going to, that I was talking about going to away games. Oakley, if you've never been to a game at the Jack Edwards, you're missing it. It's beautiful. It is actually a fun place to go. It's clean. It's got a great grandstand down one side. You've got the trains running down the track. You've got, it's just, I don't know, there's something magical about the Jack Edwards.
Tell me the important thing. How good are the souvlaki's? Are they the same quality you used to get back in the day at Middle Park?
No, you'll never get those again. You'll never get those again. Well,
that's missing one thing.
But, it is.
Wasn't the greatest thing about that, the press box at Middle Park was situated just above where the souvlaki's were cooked. And if the game was boring, you'd be looking at each other going, "Oh, who's doing the suva run? This game is rubbish. I'll take notes for you. Go and get the souvlaki's in."
Is that... So I don't think there's that camaraderie amongst the journos as well. That's something I think back now and I miss terribly. You mentioned Laurie Schwab earlier in this podcast or a previous one. Laurie Schwab was a great bloke, and he was... I remember Laurie, he became almost the doyen of go-to when you didn't have something, and he was so loved. Like, I remember you'd go to JOST and they'd be playing something, and somebody'd say, "What do you reckon the crowd is?" And Laurie'd say, "It was 5,000. And you go, "What?" And he said, "It's 5,000. And you go, "Okay, it's 5,000. Yeah. But and we had pools, we had sweeps, and there was Milan Ninovic, and then there was Laurie, and then there was somebody from, there was Rocco De Zio.
The Rocco De Zios and Ilias Danudis and those guys.
It was marvellous.
We'll go back to that. We're going to have to wrap this one up. We did have the hope of talking about the local versus national thing here, but unfortunately we furiously agreed, so we moved on. So basically we've decided that we should go back to state leagues and we should cut our cloth to fit the current situation, which is the game's not flush with money. why the hell are we spending so much money on bloody airfares?
And we did the episode with the 4 great lies of the game.
Yeah.
The 5th one is if we persist with the A-League, it'll push the game over the top. And all I can say to that is, in the great words of Marcel Marceau.
Okay. On that note of silence, of deafening silence, this has been another episode of the Old Gold Soccer Podcast. I'm KP. My colleague, as always, is...
I don't want to speak anymore.
Greg Blakey. We'll see you next time. Share this with your friends. Find us on Spotify or wherever you get good podcasts, and also check us out on TikTok and Instagram. We'll see you next time on the Old Gold Soccer Podcast.